Toddlers keep life interesting and lively, don't they, with all of their antics. They're constantly exploring and trying to figure things out in this great big world that they live in. They get into cabinets and drawers that they're not supposed to. They make a huge mess, which involves a load of cleaning up. And they soon enter a stage that can be most difficult for parents and siblings to deal with, the stage of the why. This is when a child asks this question over and over again, don't they, until you're ready to pull your hair out. Why are you so tall? Why is the sky blue? Why is this macaroni and cheese yellow? Why is my sister sad? Why did someone make her cry? Why did they say that? Why? And sometimes in life we deal with questions that are easy to answer, but sometimes we're faced with questions that are hard to understand or find the answers to. And sometimes we have a really deep question about why bad things happen and what can be done about them. And in this series called And It Was Good, we're talking about injustice. If justice is something right and fair or equal, then injustice is just the opposite of that, isn't it? Things in our world that are unequal, unfair, or just not right. Previously, we've talked about being aware and noticing injustice, and we've talked about experiencing injustice as well as the need to desire and correct it. And that involves listening and learning about it from other people, to open our eyes and begin to notice injustice around us. But when we do those things, it will force us to ask some deep and difficult questions, including questions about the God who is supposed to be in control of this world where it all happens. Maybe you see an injustice in the world and you wonder things like, why would they say that? How could someone do that to someone else? What makes this stuff like this happen? Why isn't anyone doing something about it? And why do these things like this keep happening in a world where we should know better by now? Or maybe you've thought, why isn't God doing something about this? Maybe this is the reason you're still not sure about all this Jesus and God stuff. Right? You can't imagine yourself being a Jesus follower if he's not going to do something about the brokenness you see around you. But you know what? God is big enough to handle our questions, even the difficult ones. People have been trying to answer these questions since the beginning of time. So why do we keep asking these questions? I think it's because it bothers us. After all, how can a good God allow things like human trafficking and prejudice and poverty and racism to happen and do nothing? Thankfully, we don't have to guess what God is really like or if God really cares. We can look at God's Son Jesus, who is the best way for us to see and understand what God is really like. Several people who knew Jesus took the time to write down what they saw and what they heard so that people like you and me who didn't get to see it with their own eyes would know what happened. I think that's amazing, and it's all written down in what we call the Bible. And one of those people, who was called Matthew, wrote down about this, and this is in the Bible too. And he was one of Jesus' closest followers and friends. His writing shows that he hung out with Jesus and knew what Jesus was about. And here's what he said. He said this: Jesus travelled through all the towns and villages of that area, teaching in the synagogues and announcing the good news about the kingdom of God. And he healed every kind of disease and illness. Wow. So while Jesus was travelling, he was teaching, he was healing and helping people as he shared the message of what God's kingdom is really like. And he talked about things like loving outcasts, freeing enslaved people, rescuing the oppressed and feeding the hungry. In other words, he was talking about justice. Everywhere he went, Jesus had something to say and do about people being treated unfairly or in a way that wasn't right. Matthew says in his writings a bit further on, when he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were confused and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. Jesus felt compassion for people who experienced things that weren't right, or unfair. Compassion is that type of feeling that makes you want to act upon that feeling. It's the feeling in the pit of your stomach when you see someone being hurt. It's the feeling that makes you want to put your arms out and help a child who's got pushed over. The feeling that makes you wish you had a few pounds spare in your pocket when you see someone suffering without any food or any clothes. That's compassion. Jesus modelled for us what God is really like when it comes to injustice. First, Jesus saw. He saw the injustice, he saw the hurt and the brokenness. And when he saw, Jesus cared. And when Jesus' heart was moved to care, then Jesus moved into action. That's what compassion is. But that still doesn't answer these questions, does it? Why doesn't God do something about the injustices that we see around us today? Why doesn't God just wave a magic wand or do that whole miracle thing that we've just heard about that God is so good at? Matthew gives us a clue in the next verse. Let's take a look at what he said here. He said to his disciples, "The harvest is great, but the workers are so few." Jesus was basically saying that it wasn't just something God should be doing something about. He was telling the people listening and asking these questions that it's time to get to work. It basically said, yes, there's plenty to do, but I want you to help. What if God has a plan to do something about injustice? And what if we are the plan? What if the miracle Jesus had in mind isn't making injustice magically go away, but instead it's you and me doing the work to end injustice on his behalf? What if it's us responding to all the things he already cares about? What if the plan is becoming more like Jesus? Wow. The Apostle Paul teaches us what it looks like to be a Christian. He said this about the church: all of you together are Christ's body, and each of you is a part of it. Paul used the illustration of one body made up of all its individual parts. Even though it may seem like the ear is independent from the toe, the whole body relies on each of the individual parts to function together as God designed it to be. And in the same way, God designed the body of Christ, or the church, to work together to help each other out. So when we talk about injustice, it's not that God isn't there or doesn't care. Instead, the church, God's people, you and me, we're called to be God's hands and feet here on this earth. Because God is always good. God is always pursuing justice. God pursues racial justice through us. God pursues non-violence towards women through us. God pursues justice for issues like sex trafficking and hunger and poverty and modern day slavery and all the injustices we see on a local and global level through us. We get to be a part of God's plan to tackle the things we think are wrong in the world. The question is this though: will you participate in what God is already doing? If so, where do we start? It seems so big, right? Here are a few steps you can take to begin. Rethink what it means to be a follower of Jesus. It's not just about turning up to church, singing songs and praying. Those things are great, but it's much, much more than that. Following Jesus means you start to see the world like he sees it. You care about what he cares about. You treat people the way he would treat them. Following means you sign up to be a part of the solution, a part of the plan. Ask, where am I? Often we tend to see injustice and ask, where is God in this mess? But it's important to choose to be part of what God is already doing in the world, to ask God to show you where your place might be in working toward justice in your community, your school, or in the world as a whole. Find a way to fight injustice. That's a challenge, but it's possible. Look and see what's happening around you that you don't think is right. See how you can help. Step up, serve, and give your time. Take the skills, personality and resources God has given you and find ways to use them to help bring justice to those around you. That's what I did when I saw that there were so many people in Southport that couldn't afford clothing for themselves or their family. I set up this clothing store that you can see behind me now here at Lakeside so that people could come and get clothing for free. And that's why also here at Lakeside Church we send clothing, medicine and toiletries and food over to Ukraine each week, because we see that there are people in need in a war-torn country and we want to do our bit to help. God cares deeply about injustice and wants to use us to do something about it. This means that God's people should be known for being people who pursue justice just like God. Just imagine what the world could look like if we became known as a group of people who are the most compassionate, just, kind, humble and resilient people. Imagine if we were the first to speak up and stand up for others no matter what. Imagine the positive impact we could have on our community, our schools and in the lives of people that we care about around us. We have so many opportunities to show people that God is for them and for the pursuit of justice. So I'd like you to have a think about what it could be to take for each of you to have an impact like that. How might that change the lives of people experiencing injustice in your world? How might that also change the way people see God?